Welcome to devMode.fm, a podcast dedicated to the tools, techniques, and technologies used in modern web development. I'm Andrew Welch from NY Studio 107, and I am joined today by my fabulous speed-walking co-host, Ryan Irelan. How you doing, Ryan?
Hey, Andrew. Doing well. Thank you.
And we're here to do another live stream where you guys can ask questions and interact with us. And I always love it when people, chime in while we're doing it. So let's get right to it. I have a philosophical scenario for you, Ryan.
Okay.
Right off the bat, I'm going to challenge you. Okay. So I don't know if you've heard of Marvel's What If, but it's basically a show where they're like, well, what if this minor thing changed in the universe? How would things be different? And I'm sure you've heard about speculation like what would the planet be like if dinosaurs still roamed the earth, right? Like if they weren't extinct and that kind of thing.
Do you mean other than baby boomers? Sorry, go ahead.
Yes, other than baby boomers. So what I want you to do is I want you to imagine a different world. So imagine a world where back in the 90s, we had web development going on and there was PHP that was running on the server to generate our personal home pages, right? And imagine, instead of JavaScript being invented in 7 days or whatever that ridiculous story is, the guy who wrote it said, you know what? This PHP thing is already running. Why don't I run PHP in the browser? Right? So imagine that world is there. Because there's a large rift in front-end development now, where there's one side that is using, and this has been noted by Chris Coyier, and everyone's seen it, where you've got people that are doing nothing but JavaScript, right? They're doing React, they're doing Vue, and they don't think anything else exists, right? They don't think CSS, HTML, they think those are both just sort of like artifacts that are generated by the JavaScript, And it's JavaScript on the front end, it's JavaScript on the server, and it's just nothing but JavaScript. And then you have the rest of the world where they're coming from a more traditional server-rendered background where, like Craft CMS is a PHP app, it renders stuff in PHP. A lot of us who are writing are using a templating language. So, for instance, in Craft CMS, it would be Twig. If it's Titanic, it would be Antlers. If it was Laravel, it would be Blade, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's, on the front end, it's JavaScript is what is there. So this is weird thing, and that's where a lot of the tension is. And that's where frameworks are starting to exist. So I think it originally came from Phoenix. It was called Live something or other. And then Caleb Porzio came up with Livewire for Laravel. And basically, it's a fancy way to have some JavaScript on the front end, but it mostly just loads partials from the back end, like the HTML rendered. In the craft world, there's Sprig to kind of do the same thing, so that you can write in Twig, and you can dynamically load stuff in from the back end and load that HTML in. So the reason why they're doing all this stuff is they want the dynamicism on the front end, but it's a pain in the ass to have it where you've got one language on the front end and another language on the back end, and they both want to render stuff, and they both want state, and it's just it's a pain in the ass, and we've all felt it. The more JavaScript you use, the more you feel it when you're using some of these back-end languages. And so I want you to imagine a world where PHP runs in both places. So PHP is the language that is blessed, right? This would be called isomorphic PHP. The idea is isomorphic basically just means the same code runs in different places, right? Mm-hmm. So it would run on the client, it would run on the server. There would be no need to do any of this kind of weird stuff that we're doing now, like loading partials and using Livewire and using Sprig, that type of thing. All right, you take it even further. Let's say we're using Twig is our language that we're rendering our web pages in. If Twig ran in the browser, just natively ran in the browser, our problem is solved, right?
Okay.
What is it? I'm asking you. I
mean, I guess, it's all.
All right, thanks for showing up, Ryan.
I'm just trying to think. There's a couple of things to address. One is like these sprinkle tools, like you're talking about with like Sprig in the craft world, and then Alpine.js and petite view, right, which
Yeah.
we're talking about. And those are kind of like almost like little bridge tools that make it easy for people that are doing like traditional like server rendered pages to have the same and like an easy sort of way of getting the client side code to do what they want.
Right.
That's at least my like would be how I would describe it.
Right. And what I'm saying is, if you could
But
have
you're saying if
Twig,
everything was like on the client side, and
yeah.
in
If whatever you used on the
oh,
server side, let's say it's Twig, it could be PHP, it could be whatever. If that thing also ran in the browser, this solves a massive problem, right? This solves the problem of interactivity, but also server rendering, right? And it solves the issue of two totally different things wanting to control rendering and the state of stuff.
yeah, that's true. Although it doesn't introduce other problems that you would already see if you're building like a fully front end like client side application, where just sort of managing and getting the data from the server, like from wherever the data source is.
Well, what
But
I'm saying is
yeah,
it would be isomorphic in that it would run both places,
right.
right? So
Okay. I guess
all
I
of
feel like
your
we're just kind of rearranging the deck chairs a little bit.
well,
But
the point is using one language, all of your stuff runs on the server, and then using the same language, that same stuff runs in the browser, right? So it will run the exact same thing client side as server side. That solves a massive problem in terms of who controls the state, who renders stuff, how do we get data, how do we
right.
translate data from one language to another, and all that kind of fun stuff.
Yeah, I don't feel like I'm performing very well in your thought experiment, but yes.
Oh my goodness. All right, so let's get a comment from someone who is awake. So Matt Wilcox says, front-end feature versus back-end features are very different, though. The APIs, latencies, et cetera, language construct. Yes, no, I understand that. Like, they might be doing different things on the client, and they might be doing different things on the server. But still, the idea that we could have, let's say, a component that it can render itself on the server, and then it can also render itself on the front end, and then it can respond to user input or data and change state. That would be a huge gain. There still would be always parts of the app that might be server-side code only, like that could be a thing. And there might be some things that are only client-side. But that is one of the big problems these days in writing applications that are using significant amounts of JavaScript on the front end and a server-rendered backend like Craft or Laravel or whatever, is that you render all this stuff. You've got you got your component system and you render all this stuff and you want to render it so that the page loads quickly, so that as soon as they request the page, it's there. And that you don't have to run JavaScript or all that stuff. But then you also want to have components on the front end so that when stuff changes, or there's user input or whatever kind of reactivity you need, that's going to work too, right? And I think it really solves a lot of problems if you do have the same model on the client and in the server and allow for transitioning back and forth between these things. And that's effectively, this is kind of what Sprig is doing, and it's kind of what Livewire is doing too. Except the difference is that you really can't run PHP in the browser. So instead of actually running it in the browser, we're sending off a request somewhere, letting the server render the thing, and then putting it back into the browser, right? But there's no reason, if PHP or if Twig ran in the browser, there's no reason you couldn't just be like, okay, render this stuff here. As opposed to go back to the server, render the stuff here, and then bring it back into the browser as HTML, right? So,
yeah.
Go ahead.
I follow you. I mean, I know it's a thought experiment, but I think about the speed of progress in browsers adopting new technology. And one of the advantages that we've had with doing everything server side is that we're not at the mercy of the browser being the controlling point, sort of the bottleneck for everything.
Right. And again,
but conceptually, yeah, I agree. And that's the advantage of the JavaScript world, is that they can do everything in the browser. So they're not worrying about they basically don't have one foot on the dock and one in the boat, and they're slowly doing a split.
Right. And
Which
so
is
I
what
think
it feels like sometimes when you're using something like Petite Vue or Alpine, or even just like vanilla JavaScript. It does feel like you're kind of, you can't decide which way to go. And it feels messy.
Or even Sprig too. I mean, I guess my point in saying
Sprig,
my point in saying this is that I think it's important to keep in mind what the pain points are here. And I don't want to get hung up on the idea of, well, you don't want everything running in the browser, because I'm not saying that the whole application is going to run in the browser. We're talking about isomorphic code, where the same code base can run in both places, but you're not necessarily doing the same thing in both places, right? So don't think of it as, well, we have to worry about whatever features the browser supports, because you can still render as much as you want server-side and hydrate only as much as you need client-side. But the idea that you can have it in an isomorphic way so that the same code can run in both places, and maybe it's just the code for your components that run in the same place, right? So they can pre-render for the initial request, and then they can render again on the front end. And then maybe you've got other server-side code that does other stuff that is never going to run on the front end. But you're getting at... Go ahead.
Go ahead. You finish it, and then I'll follow up.
Well, you're getting at what I was trying to kind of lead to in all of this, right? So if we did have Twig that ran on the back end and also could run on the front end, which is sort of kind of what Sprig is trying to kind of trick you into having happen. If you had something that did that, then you would have no need for something like Sprig, and you would have probably no need for even JavaScript, and it would greatly simplify your model. So if you have been using Sprig, so Alex Brinley says that Sprig is fantastic. He's been using it a lot in his current build. And I think that's the nice thing about Sprig, is that it does bring these reactive capabilities and this kind of interactivity to front-end developers without them having to do a whole lot. It basically is kind of similar to Livewire in a way. And the way that it works is it will render fragments of HTML on the server and then pull them back in and re-render the DOM with those new things in the DOM. So this is, again, something that if we had the capability to run Twig in both places, we would never use Sprig. Like, there would be no point in having it at all, because we could just render the new stuff in Twig on the front end. And where I was leading to with all of this is trying to get people that are more traditional developers, in that they're used to backend languages like PHP or Laravel, or, obviously Laravel is PHP, or Twig, or Blade, or say Antlers, or whatever these server rendered things are, to get people to understand what a lot of the appeal of JavaScript is for web development. And one of the big gains that a lot of people are seeing, whether they're using a framework or not, is that they use the same language on the server and the same language on the front end. And not just the same language, they use what's called I can't even say it now, isomorphic JavaScript, which means the same code runs on the back end to render their component, the exact same code renders on the front end to render their component, and the front end is what picks it all up in terms of the process is called hydration, where it brings the state in, and then the front end can interact with the user on their browser. And I think this is just a massive advantage that we should keep in mind, that even if we're not immersed in that ecosystem of JavaScript is everything, this is a massive advantage that you have, in that you have one language to get really good at, and you have one code base that you can write that runs in both places. Like, that is huge. What do you think?
Right. I agree. And I was going to ask you what led to this thought experiment, but I think you kind of explained that you've been thinking about the difference between the two worlds. Have you been working a lot in like JavaScript applications recently, or?
Well, I've been writing probably more TypeScript than anything else recently. Although I've been doing some plugin updates, so there's been a decent bit of PHP that's been going on too.
Right.
I think a lot of this is just stuff that has been going on for so long that, ever since I started using Vue and started doing more and more front end stuff, it's been an issue where it is very contentious, and it's a pain in the ass, quite frankly, to render stuff in Twig and try to come up with some kind of a component system, which honestly, Twig is not, it's not great for components. Like, it's really just not a wonderful language to use for that. But to do that in Twig, and then also to have interactivity, even basic stuff like a load more button on the front end, well, then you got to be using JavaScript or Vue or something like that, and then you end up writing code over there. Now, this is where Sprig is something that people are liking because it makes it so they don't have to write any JavaScript, right? It's essentially trying to give you what I was imagining before with Twig running in the back end and the front end. It's kind of like trying to trick you into the fact that you can run this Twig in the front end, even though it's not really happening. So it's been a source of tension because I've been writing stuff I've been using more and more Vue, but then it becomes more and more a pain in the ass in terms of who owns the state, who renders the thing. Right. Are we really just going to duplicate this code? We don't want there to be Faut where there's no content, Fauk where there's no content rendered on the page until JavaScript loads. So we really want the server-side render to deliver the page and then the front end to pick up the interactivity from there. So it's been a source of tension using Craft CMS as a backend, but it could be anything, right? It could be any backend system, and then trying to make something more appish or more interactive on the front end. And I realize that Sprig is something that is kind of trying to bridge the gap, and it may be, for a lot of things, it may be the kind of thing where like, okay, this is good enough, I just need simple interactions, no big deal. Where I'm trying to lead to in this is just to try to get people to understand, people who are not fully immersed in JavaScript is the world, why some people are adopting it in that way. And it's because of JavaScript's superpower of being able to be run in the browser. And with Node, or even Dino these days with TypeScript, being able to run it in the backend. So you can run the same code in both places, right? And Alex Brindley says, "Ugh, please no," because I'm going to put it up here. So Matt Wilcox says, so Craft 4 has Node.js rewrite, the first great JavaScript CMS. I'll tell you what, man, it's not going to happen, but I would not care at all if that happened. I would be like, fine, I don't care what this thing is written in,
Plus that the trend is like the head, like the sanity type of model, right? And then you're still writing your JavaScript app for the front end, but you're using the back end to do all the content management.
Yeah. And again, they sidestep that issue of who renders what, because it is all JavaScript that renders everything. I mean, it's just, it's a React app. That's what it is. So again, I'm just trying to get people to understand, if you are used to writing stuff in Twig or maybe even PHP or some other server rendered language, and then it becomes annoying or painful to use some of these front end frameworks, understand that a lot of that pain is the juxtaposition of the two things that want to render stuff and the two things that want state. If there was something, and it happens to be that it's JavaScript, but it could be anything. If there was something that worked on the server and on the client, whether it's Twig or Blade or Antlers or PHP or whatever it is, it makes a lot of that a lot easier. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of people are real into this whole JavaScript thing, because they can do all the things.
Yeah. Trendiness aside, for sure, there's a reason behind it. And I don't think it's good enough just to be, not that you are, I know you're not, to be dismissive of like JavaScript only apps.
Yep.
Because honestly, like JavaScript had the advantage because it already lived in the browser, going back, I don't know, 2 decades.
Yeah.
But the movement with React, especially, I mean, React is gigantic.
Yeah.
It dwarfs even Vue in terms of its adoption rate.
By a lot. Yeah.
Even though Vue, like I think in people we know, Vue is probably maybe more popular than React, but it's all about whatever orbit you're in.
Yep.
But I think that ship has already sailed on the JavaScript side, being the, like isomorphic language that would be used for right now. And purely because like we are at the mercy of the browser developers, people that create the browsers. The process for getting a new support for like a new spec, a new feature in a browser, it's a long process to get that stuff in. And not only is it a long process, it has to get into all of the browsers as well. So
Yeah.
you have full support. So you basically would have to meet that that same challenge with any new isomorphic language that would be run both in the browser and on the server side. And so JavaScript was already in the browser, so obviously it kind of made sense that then the server side stuff is easier because it's decentralized. You don't have to go to some like a handful of authorities and ask to have this feature or that feature built in.
Yeah.
You just add it.
And to be fair, Alex said, "Ugh, please no," when Matt was talking about
JavaScript CMS.
rewriting a JavaScript CMS. So I want to put that up there. But
yeah, and I saw Matt made a comment about my internet. I'd like everyone to know that it's a combination of things with the internet. If anybody's watching on the live stream, though, that's what's
no,
going
it's
on.
just it's Ryan. It's all Ryan. It's 100%
No,
Ryan.
it's not
Don't
me.
listen to him.
I have good internet.
So Matt Wilcox says, "I'd be down for writing some native web components in JavaScript." And yeah, so that's exactly the point. So for instance, you can render the web components server side, deliver the rendered web component, and then just instantiate it on the front end, and kind of away you go. You don't have to be using these frameworks. They do make a lot of things easier and a lot of things nicer. One of the really cool things in Vue 3.2 that they added is that you can use Vue components to just make regular old web components, which I think is really cool. So you can use Vue's reactivity system, but what it spits out in the end is a regular old web component that you can just use, which I think is really neat. I'm not saying that you should drop everything and forget about Twig, forget about PHP, forget about Blade. I'm not saying that you got to because look, this stuff is going to be around forever. PHP, Ruby, there's so much code. These things are going to be around for absolutely forever. All I'm trying to say is that if you want some inkling of why there is so much momentum behind the whole JavaScript is everything push or ecosystem or whatever, I think a big part of it is the isomorphic code. You write the code and the same thing runs in both places. You got one thing to maintain. One thing I can tell you about having split code bases, because I've done cross-platform stuff before, is it sucks. It's awful trying to retain feature parity between the two. And if you're not going to do that, then you're left with that kind of weird thing where you're like, okay, well, who's going to do what part of the state? Who's going to render this and who's going to do that? And you have that conflict, and it just ends up being a royal pain in the ass,
Yeah. And now you know why everybody's moving to Electron apps.
Right. Well, yeah, right. Exactly. There are even, I think, like 1Password. They had native Mac apps, and they're just like, no, screw this. Like, we're going to a single unified code base, and they wrote it in JavaScript with Electron, and then the core of it is written in Rust, right?
Yeah.
But
so I would say that, I don't think the server render stuff is going away. Obviously, there's technology is controlled by momentum, both in what is introduced as new and also what remains around. PHP has been around for years, and if anything, Laravel created a resurgence of PHP and a wider adoption of it.
Yeah.
So I would say that wave has yet to crest, and it may not, because they're continuously innovating. However, everyone that is working only server-side technology right now should be curious and dabble in, and at this point, it's basically JavaScript, and pick a framework and learn it, because it's better to be nimble and to be able to adjust as things adjust than it is to not.
Yeah. Well, and that's one ability that at least currently JavaScript has and nothing else does. It's in the biggest platform in the world. The browser is the biggest platform in the world. and JavaScript is there. Now there is WASM, and in theory, you could start writing stuff in Go or Rust, and you could build WASM, and you could have isomorphic WASM that's running on the server that's also running in the browser. In theory, that's a thing. It's not really practical for a whole lot of things currently. It's very practical for some things, don't get me wrong. I think it's fantastic. But currently it's JavaScript, right? And all I'm suggesting, so there's way more to the JavaScript ecosystem and why it's taken off than just that it runs in both places. I'm hammering this home because it is the one thing that none of these other server languages are ever going to be able to do, very likely, you know? So that's a superpower that's really hard to overcome. I mean, yeah, Laravel is fantastic for doing custom app kind of stuff, but when you start to get any kind of front-end heaviness at all, you know, it ends up being a real pain in the ass. And then you end up with these kind of patchwork solutions like Livewire to kind of make it so that you run PHP in the browser, but really you've got a shim in the browser and it goes to the back end. And so you've got essentially a thin client. I just think it's something to keep in mind. So some other advantages to JavaScript is some of these frameworks are pretty amazing and they're geared towards doing front-end interactivity. Vue and React, especially React, is a lot simpler than a lot of people kind of make it out to be.
It has a reputation for being difficult to learn and use. Yeah.
Well, I think there's less to learn if you were learning React than there is to learn if you're learning Vue. But Vue is a little bit less programmatic in that you kind of got this template thing, and then you've got a little bit of code to make the single file component work with a little bit of CSS. I think that part of it is also that web developers, a lot of them came from being designers, and then they started gradually learning just a little bit that they needed to do these things. Whereas if you're going to be doing stuff like React, like you're just in JavaScript, you know? And there are plenty of React developers I know that everything is in a JSX or MDX file. And they never open a CSS file. They never open an HTML file. They may not even know what the HTML on their website looks like. They may have no clue, right? I mean, they're just writing it in JSX, and JavaScript is the world. And there is something compelling about writing a single file component where everything that you need is right there. But it is more complicated than doing, you know, just writing some HTML and throwing some CSS in there and all that kind of good stuff. I'm certainly not suggesting that JavaScript is going to take over the world. I'm just suggesting that there are reasons why it is growing as rapidly as it is. And one of the big ones, at least in my opinion, is that it runs in both places. You can have that single isomorphic code that it will handle rendering it on the server and rendering it in the browser. And even the idea of like server-side render, Ryan, may be something that goes away from the point of view that like we already have virtualized servers, but it may be a renderer that does it as opposed to a server that does it. You know what I mean? Like, so for instance, Vercel has a concept for, I think they call it, what do they call it? I forget what it's called. Anyway, the way that it works is it's very similar to the way PHP works. So a request comes in for a page, it will look for the cached version of the page, and if it has it, it'll return it. And if not, it will run the JavaScript code to render that page and then deliver it. And it works instantly. It's like a server-side pre-render or something like that is what they're calling it. So
but isn't the server like it's all like edge servers and stuff?
Yeah, but that's the cool thing is these are edge servers that are living near wherever the person requesting it is, right? So that's why I'm saying like the concept of a server rendering stuff may morph into just being a renderer. You know, it's like this thing running somewhere that does whatever it needs to do to render the thing. And that may happen for PHP as well as for any of these other languages, right? Like we went from having, you know, a physical server where we had accounts on there that we could go in and we had shared hosting where, you know, one site could screw up the other site. And then we went to VPS hosting where we can have our own little VPS that's insulated from the world, but it's still our little server, you know? And now some of these offerings from Netlify and Vercel and some other places AWS Fargate is another example. That's
Mhm.
Docker related, but anyway, where there is no server. There's just like, here's your thing. Like, this is the thing that renders stuff. And if you've heard of Lambda functions, that's another like little renderer thing.
Yep.
So all I'm saying is the thing that renders it is maybe just going to be a renderer that lives somewhere,
Yeah, that makes sense.
And Alex Brindley.
Can I change? Oh, go ahead.
Well, let me just clear up this, then you can change. Yeah. So the problem with everything being client side is you're replying to client devices that match your own work as well as intent. Well, but that's not what I'm saying though. I'm saying that the code would be isomorphic. So you can have as much run on the server as you want, and you can have just the things running on the client that need to run on the client, like the components that need to be interactive. That could be the part that runs on these low-end devices. Or it could be nothing. Like I have written entire websites in nothing but JavaScript, and it delivers almost no JavaScript to the client. Like it's a static render of the page. It just happens to be using JavaScript instead of PHP as the rendering engine that produces the HTML and the CSS. So I'm not saying the entire application is going to be client-side or that you are relying on the client device entirely. Because I agree, like that was a significant problem with early JavaScript sites, is that they just took the entire thing and they shoved it down the wire, and then you're sitting here on your little 3G phone and the thing wants to explode at what it's trying to do, And that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying everything runs on the client. I'm saying the same code can run on the server or the client in the case of things like components or whatever little bits are needed,
Yep, that makes sense. You mentioned WebAssembly,
Yep.
or WASM, and you sent me a photo the other day. I asked you what you were going to be reading on your vacation, and one of the books there was a WebAssembly book, and I was disappointed that you were reading technology books while on vacation.
Look, man, you keep moving the goalposts. What's the deal?
Oh, first it was just to read a book, and now I'm moving it to...
First you shame me for not reading, okay? And then, meanwhile, I do read like kids' books, okay? I read about, everybody poops and all that stuff, okay? I read that.
Just
but
for
I'm
yourself?
like, okay.
Because your kids are older. But
I'm like, okay, here, Ryan. Here's some books. I got some
That's
books
what you said.
here, okay? So
Yep.
I got a test-driven development book, and I've got The Art of WebAssembly. And I said, you asked me what was I going to read on my vacation that I'm going on in like 4 or 5 days. And I sent you this photo, and I figured you'd be like, oh, I'm proud of you, Andrew. You're actually reading a book. But no, it was nothing but disappointment. Nothing but disappointment. Are you German, Ryan? What's going on?
I'm not. But okay, so WebAssembly, test-driven development. I'm in a lot of conversations with you like every day throughout weeks and weeks. So I know kind of like those are two things that you've been interested in.
Yeah.
And I assume you're reading those because you probably don't feel like you know enough about them yet, and this is like you kind of diving in a little bit deeper. Is that right?
Yeah.
So, but why do it on vacation though? Why not just completely remove yourself from all technology thinking, and just read like like Henry David Thoreau or something like that?
You want me to read Dostoevsky? You want me to read Crime and Punishment or something?
If you read Dostoevsky, then I'll be super impressed.
I have read in my day. I have read plenty of Dostoevsky, and Crime and Punishment was one of my favorite books. I really enjoyed it. Now, the fact that I haven't picked the book up for 20 years, like don't give me any crap. But I used to read a lot of those books. In fact, I ordered this like 100 greatest books ever written thing, where you get the hardbound editions of
cool,
the 100 greatest books, and they're all, it's somewhat subjective, but they're all really good books. They're everything you've heard about. So I own those. I've got all of those. I haven't read them all. I mean, I've read a bunch of them, but not all of them. Moby Dick was another. I really enjoyed revisiting Melville, for instance. I thought that was really fun. But here's the thing, man. You're kind of telling me you're going on vacation. You are not allowed to read that book. You must vacation the way that I vacation. Is that fair? I don't know how fair that is.
I don't vacation, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I get a certain sense of burnout if I don't give my brain a chance to ponder other things or do other things. It's the reason that I really enjoy doing like my own yard work, is because it forces me to get into something that is, you know, manual labor, but also not something that I do all day long.
Okay, I
And I
get
always
that.
think about a vacation as being something different, but maybe it's just me just kind of being nostalgic for like sitting on a beach and reading like a summer like reading pick or something like
Yeah.
that. But
So
you do you. Don't worry about what I'm
so
how
Matt
I'm judging.
Wilcox is much more open-minded than you are. He says read whatever energizes you, whatever that is. I mean, whereas Ryan is like, no, what you're planning to do is not good enough. I'm going to go further with this, Ryan, since you gave me so much grief for this. Let's say you were going on vacation somewhere, and I said, all right, Ryan, go out every night and go to the club and get blasted every night, right? And you're like, well, that's not really how I enjoy my vacation. I just want to like chill out. I'm like, but you're on vacation, Ryan. You should be partying, right? Would that be fair?
It wouldn't be, but I disagree with the whole premise. Yeah, I don't have anything else to say.
Okay, but you're saying that these books are no good for me because I should be doing something totally outside of tech.
I didn't say that.
Even though maybe I would get some kind of satisfaction and enjoyment out of reading these, you're saying it's not good enough. I got to do what
Well, let
Ryan
me
wants
ask
me
you
to
this.
do. Okay, yeah.
As an example, you like to go on almost daily hikes,
Yes, sir.
right? And you don't browse your phone the whole time you're on your hikes, do you?
Depends. A lot of times I play Pokemon Go when I'm on the hike, so if there's a little
Okay.
Pokemon running
But
around,
do you
I
let
might
your
catch them.
mind kind of wander? Is it a place for you to kind of work through things or let ideas come to you? Right.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking about the same thing is just like doing something adjacent to what you do every day to
Yeah.
kind of like open up new pathways and new thinking. That's it.
I get it. I understand. And like when I'm going on my hikes, sometimes I don't listen to anything. Sometimes I listen to music. Sometimes I listen to podcasts. If I listen to podcasts, it's almost always something non-tech. So it would be like a lot of times MMA stuff I'll listen to. I know you love. I know that's one of your favorite things in the world.
It's one thing I don't understand.
Yeah. But I wanted to claw back to something real quick.
Yep.
So I mentioned Moby Dick, right? The book.
Mm-hmm.
So Jonathan Melville, who's someone who sometimes is on here as a co-host and is a fellow craft developer, who incidentally is someone that has moved over to the JavaScript is everything perspective, where he's not doing no twig no more. Everything is in Nuxt and in Vue components in JavaScript. Also, Patrick Harrington, who is a co-host on here, also has moved over to Nuxt, where JavaScript is everything and Vue components. Just saying, that relates to the thing we're talking about before. There are a number of people that have run into the same issues that I'm talking about in terms of using one language on the server, another one on the client, and just said, enough's enough. I'm going to have one, and it's going to be JavaScript, and I'm going to be using Nuxt and Vue. You could be using React and Next.js or Gatsby or whatever. But the point is, simplify, and build on top of the stack. But anyway, Jonathan Melville mentioned to me at one point when we're talking that he is somehow related to Moby. Have you ever heard of the artist and musician Moby?
Yeah.
Okay.
I thought you were going to say Herman Melville. But anyway, go ahead.
Right. So I was just like, oh, really? I didn't know that. So his actual name is Richard Melville Hall, Moby. And I'm like, oh, that must be where the name Moby came from. And Jonathan was just like, I never even thought of that, because they're both related to Herman Melville, right?
Oh, they are. Okay.
So his name Moby comes from the fact that Herman Melville wrote Moby Dick. So that's where the name Moby comes from.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
I haven't listened to Moby in a long time. I'll throw that on for some coding later.
I don't really know if I've ever listened to Moby either. But you're talking about doing your own yard work and stuff, doing that kind of thing. When I get out of here, when I'm done with the podcast, I'm doing a yard project with my son. So he's been building his own trail through the woods. So I'm going to get in there and chainsaw some stuff for him. And then also we've got a hammock that previously I've been using those tree safe things where you kind of wrap around the tree and you use that to hang the hammock. You know what I mean? You know what I'm talking about? It's like it's just a strap that goes around it. Well, that ended up kind of falling apart. So I'm just decided to screw the tree, and I'm literally just going to screw some deadbolts like right into the tree to mount the thing. The tree's going to be fine. Don't worry. The tree will be okay. But so yeah, I'm going to
leave the hammock. Do you leave the straps up? Is that why they got weathered? And then
yeah, I guess it's probably not what I was supposed to do, but
no, they're not really made for that. But that's okay. But you go ahead and tap. Hey, do you have maple trees on your property?
We mostly have black locust, which apparently they're so tall and such a hard wood that they were used for making the masts of ships and stuff like that. Oh, wow. Speaking of Herman Melville. So Caroline is saying, just make sure you don't listen to Moby on social media. Honestly, I don't know if I have ever listened to a Moby song or not. Like, I just don't know. I might have. It's not on my playlist or anything.
What Moby says on social media.
Yeah, and also I don't care whatsoever what Moby does or says on social media.
Caroline, can you just like summarize it so I don't have to go on Twitter?
Oh God, no! Make Ryan go on Twitter. Don't summarize anything. Don't summarize anything.
Moby is an open source project to advance the software containerization movement.
Yeah,
and help the ecosystem take containers mainstream.
Yeah,
the Moby project. That's the Moby.
All right.
Okay.
Anyway, now that you, so I will pick some kind of quote unquote normal book, like some fiction book, and maybe I'll bring that along too, Ryan. Okay. I'll let you know what I end up reading. I am going to finish a book on this vacation, though. If it doesn't happen, it's because my kids were driving me crazy and I couldn't read. Right? That's the only thing. That's the only thing I could think that could end up happening. Right?
You tell your kids what my parents told me when we were on vacation. Go outside and play.
Yeah.
Leave me alone.
Well, we're going to Cape Cod, and we're going to be within walking distance of the beach. And part of me wants to be like, just go, like, ride your bike or walk to the beach, go do your thing. But on the other hand, I'm like, I don't really want my kids in the ocean without me being there. You know what I mean? Because there are these things called riptides, and I don't know. Maybe I'll just tell them, don't go in the water unless we're there.
So, I don't know. Caroline had give some.
Oh, you're just obsessed on this. All right.
I'm so disconnected from anything.
Well, stay disconnected then.
Yeah, but no, I'm just kind of curious.
Look, she's saying she said just don't follow him on social media, and you already were not. This is like my son when I say don't touch the burning hot flame, and he's like, well, I wasn't touching it, but now I'm going to. Like, you know, what are you doing?
All right, anyway. Moving on. Thank you for the warning, Caroline. Thank you for letting me know.
Yeah. So the other thing I wanted to mention real quick is that on our last discussion, we talked about when to use Vite and when to use Webpack. And I mentioned that one of the reasons would be if you have an old code base, then I would reach for Webpack because it just works. Well,
unless you're into suffering.
But what I found out is that Vite actually probably should have worked for the Europa Museum project all along. And it's as simple as
the Graph CMS sample project.
Correct. Which I converted the Spoken Chain, which is an e-commerce site, over to Docker and Vite. And then I converted the Europa Museum project over to, originally I tried Vite, but I ran into a whole bunch of problems. So I converted that over to Docker and Webpack. And then Cavil Blood is someone that is using my Vite plugin with Craft, and he was running into an issue very similar to what I ran into with the Europa Museum, which is that when you try to import an old CommonJS library, it would error and say that default is not defined. And we're not going to get into the whole difference, but there basically are different JavaScript module formats, one of which came out of Node, which is CommonJS, and then there is the standardization for the browsers, which is ES modules, which now Node, as of Node 12, Node has adopted ES modules as well. So everyone is unifying behind that. You're going to say?
It's the new future.
Yeah.
I was going to send you also sent me this, but I found it when I was researching some ES module stuff. But we'll put a link to the Mozilla article, the cartoon deep dive.
That's a great article. It's a great article if you want to know more about it. But the long and the short of it is that in the Vite config, for the input, where you say, you know, where is the starting point for this particular project? If you're doing a JavaScript project, that input is going to be implicit. It's going to be just the HTML file, and everything will just work. When you're using something like Craft, you have to specifically tell it, this is the JavaScript that I want on this page. And I was doing that as /source/js/app.js. Apparently, and I don't know why, having that leading slash there causes the built-in CommonJS plugin, causes the built-in CommonJS plugin in Vite to screw up and not work. So all I had to do was put a little dot in front of that where it's /, so it's basically saying the current directory, and everything just works. And this is something that Cavil Blood helped me uncover. And then I'm like, I wonder if that's what caused the issues with this Europa project. And I went back, and I was very rapidly able to get the whole project up and running in Vite by just by putting a dot in front of the input import, which is crazy. I don't know why. I know that a tenet of Vite is that it does not try to do anything with absolute paths. So maybe that's what was going on here. I don't really know. It doesn't make complete sense to me. But just changing that one thing allowed me to get that up and running in Vite, which is kind of cool. It's something Andrea, I know she's here in the chat. She had wanted to see that up and running in Vite, so I got that converted over. After I figured this out, so I want to backtrack a little bit on me saying that, you know, if you got an old code base, use Webpack. Vite is a lot more viable for older code bases than I gave credit to. There probably still are more edge cases that Webpack handles well, but Vite is looking more and more attractive. I mean, I was able to retrofit it on both of these two sites that came from completely different people, completely different patterns of working, as I think you noted. And I was able to convert them both over with the HMR and all that lovely stuff. The only problem I ran into in converting that Europa project over was there was a circular reference. So basically, imagine file A imports file B, but file B also imports file A. So how do you resolve that? That's what's called a circular reference. So I ended up working around that, and it was a very minor thing that I ended up working around it, and it ended up being that he wasn't even using that code anymore anyway. So there was no point in me fixing it, even though I fixed the circular import. But I just wanted to mention that because Vite has been really great, and this affects you because I think that some of the modules, like you're working on renovating CraftQuest with Vite, some of the modules like Axios that were CommonJS, and the advice that I gave you was just, hey, just use something else. You could have just used it. You could have just used it.
Yeah, no, I had to abandon some things. But now I'm gonna try that. I actually just I just merged into master before this live stream, so I'm probably not gonna introduce it yet.
Well, why go back though? If you're already using fetch, why go back to Axios, man?
No, not that, but just I'm gonna try the // and then see if I can reintroduce something.
Yeah.
Because there's also all sorts of workarounds to get even the older stuff working. Like it would work, but I'd have to look at my code again.
Oh my God. Ben Croker says he's late to the party. Ben, you re-listen to this podcast when we publish it, because the beginning was all about you and Sprig and all that kind of stuff. I'm serious.
That's true.
Ben Croker. True. Yeah, he's gonna find the first part of it pretty interesting, I think.
Yep.
But in any event, so I thought that was pretty cool that Vite was far more capable than I gave it credit for. I was aware of the CommonJS plugin, but I thought it was something that you had to manually use. Right. But you don't. Like, apparently, it just tries to figure it out itself. And I think what was going on is because what we were giving it was an absolute path, Vite says, oh, absolute paths, I don't mess with those. Like, I'm just going to pass it in just as it is. So I think you don't get some of the shims that will try to do this magic behind the scenes for you, I think is what it ends up being.
Interesting. I'll have to try that.
And Ben is asking, so I'll put this back up. He says, late to the party, streaming on a Thursday. Yeah, I know. It's tomorrow. I'm actually doing doing another thing where I'm taking the day off tomorrow and taking my kids to Six Flags Great Adventure. So they're going to go out and they're going to eat all sorts of horrible food.
You're driving
and then
all the
barf.
way down to Six Flags Great Adventure? How far is it?
It's about an hour and a half from me.
In New Jersey?
No, there's more than one, Ryan. There's life outside of New Jersey. Come on, man.
Because I
Darien
didn't
Lake.
know. I thought they. What is it called?
Darien Lake.
Okay. I thought Great Adventure was only the one near me where I grew up in New Jersey. I know there's a lot of Six Flags.
Yeah, Darien Lake, Six Flags. I don't know. I think it's Great Adventure. Anyway, the point is, I'm not going to be here tomorrow. That's the reason
Great
why
Adventure's the one where
I'm
I
not streaming.
work.
Jeez.
Okay. I worked there.
My book isn't good enough. The amusement park I go to isn't good. What is ever good enough for you, Ryan? It's unbelievable.
You just didn't name it right. All right. Let's see.
Well, I want to hear more about your trials and tribulations.
Yeah,
converting. We're not getting you off the hook. I want to hear all about your Craft Quest journey.
It's
and
all
the fact
done.
that you videotaped it, right?
No, I didn't videotape any of it. It would have been a lot of like your name and cussing probably during the video.
That'd be great though.
No, it's all done. Merged to master. I'm just doing some final tests and I'm going to deploy it. So I would say that I haven't started to realize the benefits yet, because other than just the local development environment experience, which I think is superior. But I added something with some JavaScript, and I realized this is like so much easier and more manageable. Talking about earlier where we're kind of like where you're bridging the divide between server rendered and the JavaScript stuff. It just makes it so much easier. So that's been, because it kind of forces you into a certain way of working. But honestly, the biggest benefit that I got out of this whole thing was just rethinking a lot of the project and the structure, how I was doing things, and just I just revamped so much stuff. I touched so much template code in this, but it's going well. I'm glad that it's done. I added a lot of additional work. Yeah, or at least done to where I can say, okay, now I can just go back to just fixing bugs and improving things, adding features. But yesterday I started redesigning some of the pages because I ran into some performance stuff when I was testing on the staging server, and I decided that I needed to obviously optimize, and part of that optimization was making better content choices. What was being displayed? How much of it was being displayed? And so that way, because does someone really want 50 video courses listed on the same page at the same time? Probably not. They probably don't mind paginating through or doing a load more or something like that. So there's just certain things that I did yesterday to optimize things. So it's much snappier even than when I last showed you a little screenshot of what I was doing.
And this was always a problem, right? It was just masked by caching or something, or?
Yeah, definitely masked by caching, and a good hosting environment. So it was just a matter of just basically I had to pay that debt. And part of it was, I think we talked about this last time where, I MVP'd this thing a little over 3 years ago, built it up in just a few months, and the goal was to launch it, get the material out there, start the business. And I'm just been having to pay back some of that technical debt that I created for myself. And that's just that's where I'm at. So I'm excited to have it done.
So I don't want to recap everything that we already talked about this, but you're primarily doing this so that you have a more modern and stable base upon which to build a number of features that you want to build, right? Like that's the impetus.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's all sorts of stuff on the site that needs to be improved in terms of the flexibility of the user interface, the reactivity of it, just so it has a better, snappier feel, less like just a big rendered page,
right?
Which is kind of what it was before.
Right, because it was
So,
kind of an MVP, and you were getting up and running, and
yeah,
that's fine. Like we do that all
right.
the
The
time.
Cobblers Children has no shoes, right? Like you're,
That's the
so
worst mixed metaphor I've ever.
so, uh, anyway, it's been really good. I've been kind of cranking on it pretty hard for, well, this week for sure, last week and this week, and then just a lot of like evenings work on it. So it's kind of been my evening project,
So
but it's good
biggest.
to have it.
Give me
Go ahead.
the top 2 biggest frustrations with doing this conversion.
I think anytime you adopt a new like structure for a project and you're not yet familiar with it, but you're just kind of jumping in, it can be frustrating as you're trying to sort out like where things go, how to approach, like where do I add this code, or if I have to import this module, how do I do that here and then here? Like so
Right.
that was like an initial frustrating part, but now I'm really comfortable and familiar with that.
So you were in a new city and didn't know how to get to the 7-Eleven, but now that you figured out how to get to all those places, you're
Yeah.
pretty good. Yeah.
And you didn't really have a map. I mean, I guess, or you didn't have like a phone with GPS that would tell you like where you were and how to get somewhere. Although I did have to call and like phone a friend. I did have to phone you a couple times to ask you like, hey, like I would bang my head up against something long enough to where I wasn't just like giving up too early, but I was really actually I was being stubborn by not asking.
And for anyone who's
someone who would
listening,
know.
trust me, like I made Ryan prove to me that he had really bashed his head into something. Like I wouldn't even talk to him unless we're on a video call and he had big marks on his forehead and smashing it into something.
But it was good. I mean, it's really nice. It feels good to move the whole project forward in terms of the foundation that it's on with
Right.
the build system. It worked great. I used serve.host for the hosting for the site.
Yep.
And just had to update just some config in serve so it would run like npm run build and that I could point it at the directory.
Yeah, this
the
is the
build
part
chain
that you
directory.
kept on complaining about to me before. Why you didn't want to do it is because
But I
it would
didn't want to
change
read.
the
Yeah, and
project
it actually ended up
structure.
being, it actually ended up being not, that actually was not
Yeah, you just changed
the
one
work
path, right?
that I thought it was going to be. The work
Yeah.
that I thought that I didn't know was once that I got in there and started optimizing things and restructuring things, that I started to see all my old work come up. I'm like, oh man, like I can't ship this with this. Like I have to.
Right. I'm sure
I have to
everyone can
redo it.
relate that you go back and look
Oh,
at your old
totally.
code and you're just like, oh, why was I lazy when I did this? Why past Ryan? Why, you know what I mean? Like I do that. But I don't say past Ryan, I say past Andrew.
Yeah, well, that would be kind of weird if you said past Ryan.
But I do try to do that. Like I actually make an effort to, if I catch myself taking what might be a shortcut, I try to say, I really try to not do it because it's one of those long-term pain things. You know, if it's any code that has any kind of life cycle and I'm going to be living with it for a while, or anyone's going to be living with it for a while, I do my best to not do that. Now, you can't always do it because a lot of times when you're writing stuff, you don't know what you don't know, and you don't know that you're doing something that architecturally may not end up being the best way to do it. But whenever I am consciously aware of it, I try my best to be as kind as I can to future Andrew.
That is good advice. You should be. I wouldn't. Yeah, and I'm not mad at myself for my previous decisions. Like I did them for a reason and with a certain intent. But yeah, it was time to pay up, and so I did.
Right. And that's the thing is, you always pay. So whenever you save 5 minutes here or 10 minutes there by, kind of half-assing something that you could do in a better way, you will pay. Like, you will pay.
Yep.
Like, or if not you, somebody else, right? At some point, someone is going to pay. So real quick, I'm getting a lot of flack from Caroline about the Six Flags Great Adventure. Okay, she says it is not Great Adventure. There is a Six Flags that we're going to in Darien Lake, and we're going to have a great adventure there, Ryan.
Oh,
okay?
now you're just changing after the fact.
Yeah.
That's not what you said. You said Six Flags Great Adventure. Six Flags Great Adventure is in Jackson, New Jersey.
I'm just implying
about
we're going to have a
20
great
minutes from
adventure.
where I grew up and where I worked on Splashwater Falls in
Listen,
between
man.
high school and college, maybe? I don't remember.
Listen. I edit this podcast, and you're never going to notice it, right? It's going to be perfect. I'm going to say Six Flags and have a great adventure, okay? It's just going to be like spliced in there, and you're going to sound silly trying to correct me because I'm retroactively going to fix it. You know what I'm saying?
But she knows. Carolyn said Six Flags Great Adventure is like 11 hours from you. Thank you, Caroline.
No, I'm going to convince you both. I'm going to convince you both that you're crazy.
Oh my gosh.
So the next time that we do this stand-up, you're going to have
Yes.
your new Craft Quest is going to be deployed. You're going to have
Yes.
your new platform good to go. It's going to be using Vite, and you're going to be thrilled that you've got something you can iterate on quicker to add features to the site, right?
Yeah, I'm going to actually rewrite the whole thing in React.
Okay.
No, just
I
kidding.
mean, that's reasonable.
Be a fun side project.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
You got
some of
time?
the projects and this is relating to what we were saying before, some of the projects I have coming up are going to be Nuxt sites. I am waiting for Nuxt 3 to come out, which is supposed to be August. Now they pushed it back to September, the beta of Nuxt 3. And the NY Studio 107 site is the first one. I'm going to redo it in Nuxt 3. I'm using that as a test bed for Nuxt 3 because it's a beta. But I'm moving the JavaScript direction for a lot of these sites, you know?
Awesome. That sounds good.
Yeah.
That's going to be in beta in September, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's supposed to be. I mean, originally it was supposed to be August. Nuxt 3 would be in beta, but now it's September. But I'm doing it for similar reasons that Patrick and Jonathan did it. I want to be using one language in all the places, and I want to be using these front-end frameworks that let me do all sorts of fancy stuff. And,
Yep.
you know,
And it's important to hedge a little bit with the technology that if you know something, it's important to hedge by learning another thing that is also very popular because things change fast, and the industry that we work in is very, very different than the one that I started in 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So,
well, we're building full-blown applications. Like a lot of the sites we're building for clients may not be, but others might be, right? And understand that this is not going to be, full-on client-side JavaScript for this site. I'm either going to be doing a server-side pre-render, so basically just shipping static HTML pages, Jamstack style, or I'm going to be doing the server pre-render for Cell, which is basically very similar, except that it's essentially like doing PHP with a fast CGI cache. Basically, whenever the cache is busted, it will render it on the edge. Otherwise, it delivers the static HTML. And the only JavaScript code is whatever is needed to actually run in the browser. All the other stuff just stays client-side either way. So I'm going to be ending up doing that. One other thing real quick. We got to go because we're running over time.
Yep.
Are you going to .all? The .all conference, which is at the end of September. Are you going to go, Ryan?
I'm not going this year.
All right.
But I hope that a lot of people are, if they're able to travel and do it safely and take their own measured risks. But I'm eagerly awaiting information about if there's a way to participate remotely.
Okay, and now I feel that I can't stand the name .all, Ryan. Like, I know it's a clever double entendre in that there's a .all in Craft that you use very often with queries, and they want to be inclusive, so it's .all. Like, I get it, but I hate having to do this. Every time I talk about .all, I have to say .all, the Craft CMS conference, because there may be some people listening that have no idea what it is from the name. So .all is a conference for Craft CMS developers.
Yep.
I wish it was like Craft.all or something like that. You know what I mean? Like that, even that, something with it in there. You know, I don't know.
Yeah, but conference names. There's always they always have like their own flavor.
Yeah, but there's another conference that's running in the same city around the same time frame called Vue.js Global. Do you know what that's about, Ryan? Do you have any idea what that's about?
About viewfinders and cameras. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Right. My point is, anytime I'm talking about .all to anybody, I have to be like .all and then I have to qualify it, and I say the Craft CMS conference. You know what I mean? I don't know.
You waited this whole episode to complain about the name of a conference.
No, I actually just thought of it on the fly, which is kind of sad. So you're not going to .all.
I'm not.
I am going to decide whether I'm going when I get back from my vacation in Cape Cod.
Mm-hmm.
I think the odds are probably good that I'm not going to go. Primarily, you didn't list your reasons. You're just being mysterious. But my reasons would just be that I'm fully vaccinated. I'm not worried about that. It's more just that it's a short conference. It is probably going to be pretty expensive to get over there and stay there for the short conference. And there's an off chance that I could get stuck somewhere, if there's some kind of a Delta variant lockdown. I'm honestly not that worried about that aspect of it. And also we're just getting back from a vacation. Like I don't really know that I'm going to want to sit on a plane for 7 hours wearing a mask.
Is the View conference after?
Yes.
Or?
October 1st to the 4th, I believe. So if I go...
You could double dip and just
yes.
go do both.
If I go, it will be for both conferences, and I will be there for the whole time. That's correct. But and here's the other thing. Like, part of it is that I don't know if I want to be on a plane for 7 hours or whatever it's going to be wearing a mask. You know what I mean? And I fully support wearing masks in public. I'm just saying, like, I just don't feel like doing it. And then if the entire conference, and not just .all, but also this Vue.js conf, I'm assuming they're going to be responsible and require that everyone wear a mask and all that. I'm not sure I want to sit through the whole conference wearing a mask. This is just me personally, right? I think everyone that wants to go to the conference 100% should, right? It's going to be a fantastic conference. When I think about the idea of wearing a mask for that long on the flight over, and then for the entire duration there, and then the entire trip back, part of the lazy old me is just like, I'd rather just sit on the beanbag and I'll catch up on it in the news, find out what happened,
Yeah. No, I mean,
what are your reasons, Ryan? Why are you not going?
Oh, I mean, it's just it's like part like pandemic, part like me and my family haven't traveled a ton, and so that's like a priority. Like if I'm going to be traveling, I'm going to be doing it with them. And that those are the two main things. It's a lot of travel from the U.S. for 2 days, but I think it's cool that one of the things I like about .all, especially when it's in Europe, and especially this time, is it looks like it's majority European-based speakers, which is great to get it's one of the great things about the craft community is that, and I see it even in my own people in the Craft Quest community and subscribers, is that they're all over the world, but there's tons in Europe. And so it's nice to see and the perspective from there as well and see people speak. So, but that's really it.
And for everyone who's watching on the live stream, Tyler is behind me, and Ben Croker is saying, where's Tyler's tip? I can't hear him. He's muted. Yeah, Tyler is behind me, just mocking me the entire time that we're doing this. So we gotta go. And
he's
again,
on probation.
I'm still kind of up in the air as to whether I'm doing .all or not. I wish everyone well. I wish Pixel and Tonic well. I hope the conference is amazing. I don't know if I'm going to go or not. Not a big deal either way. But we'll see. I mean, part of me wants to travel. Part of me wants to go. And there are lots of people I would like to see again I haven't seen in a long time.
Go check out the list of speakers and the topics and the workshops. There's going to be a workshop on commerce and a workshop from Ben Croker on, is it optimization? Is that what Ben's doing?
Yeah, he's doing optimization. Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that about wraps it up.
Workshops are great because they're half days. Sorry, go ahead.
I just can't take Tyler mocking me this much. So that about wraps it up for another episode of the devMode.fm podcast. To have every episode sent to you, subscribe to us via RSS feed. Check us out on YouTube if you want to be notified whenever we go live with one of these live streams. I love it when people can participate and start to ask questions in here. And don't worry, I will take care of Tyler and send him to his room. Thanks for coming on, Ryan.
Goodbye. Hi. You can hear me finally.
Oh, he snuck his way in there. Unbelievable.
Next Tyler's tip's gonna be good.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Unbelievable.
Yes.
This kid.
You should lock your barn door.
Did you stop streaming?